Hello and welcome everyone to this panel discussion about levelling up Liverpool and its surrounding city region in the post-COVID era. And this is of course part of the London Real Estate Forum Investment Summit. My name's Irwin-Hunt. I'm a global markets editor at FDI Intelligence, which is a specialist unit of the Financial Times focused on foreign investment and economic development. Now, I must add the caveat before we get into things, my internet connection is a little bit unstable today. So if I do suddenly start lagging out, one of the panelists will jump to the rescue and carry on our interesting conversation. But over the next 50 minutes or so, I'm very glad to be joined by prominent leaders from both the public and private sectors in the Liverpool City region to discuss its economic recovery plan and of course within the levelling up agenda and how the region is really leveraging its strengths in both the knowledge and cultural sectors as we emerge from the coronavirus pandemic. So let's bring in some of our panelists. Firstly, it's a great pleasure to be joined by Tony Reeves, who's the Chief Executive of Liverpool City Council, where he heads the day-to-day management of the council and implements policy across the city of Liverpool. Also very glad to be joined by Jessica Bowes, the Director of Strategy at Bruntwood, who's been an active investor in the West Midlands and several northern cities, including Liverpool. And Bruntwood is a co-developer of the SciTech project in the city's Knowledge Quarter, which I'm sure we'll hear much more about later in our conversation. Also very glad to be joined by Raphael Miller, who is the co-head of investment for the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, where he helps to attract inward investment to the city and works closely with the private sector on some major development projects. And last but certainly not least is Barry Roberts, who is the managing director at Morgan Sindall, which is a prominent UK construction and regeneration group of 9 companies and is working on several other projects across the Liverpool City region. Welcome all to our panelists. Before we get into things, I'd like to remind all of those listening and watching that we would love to hear your questions, and I will certainly make a lot of time at the end of our discussion for those. So please do send them in via the Q&A function. I'll be monitoring this throughout and have some time at the end. Now, before we get into the panel, I'm going to pass over to Tony Reeves, who's got a few opening remarks to set the scene for our discussion. Over to you, Tony.
Thanks, Alex, and it's great to be here. I think the first thing to say is that tackling a pandemic as a city, it was completely uncharted territory for all of us. But as well as responding to the crisis and working with our partners to protect public health, which obviously is a key priority, right from the outset, we recognised that there would be really significant economic challenges as a result of this crisis. And so we started our economic recovery planning, both at a city and a city region level, literally in March last year, as we went into lockdown. And that work has continued ever since. Obviously, we've had some we've had previous lockdowns where we've been able to reopen up parts of the city centre, and people will have seen that in the run up to Christmas we were in tier 2 and Liverpool was open for business. What we didn't quite count on was that the whole of the country decided to do their Christmas entertainment in Liverpool, and so our infection rate went up very rapidly again, which we're working very hard to bring down. Is coming down very equally rapidly now, I'm pleased to say. But right from the outset, we worked with our partners in the public and private sector and the surrounding areas around the city to make sure that we were preparing for recovery, to make sure that we come out of this inevitable recession as quickly as we can, and building on the strength that we brought into that recession as a city region. So key thing is about playing to our strengths, not trying to reinvent ourselves. For us in the city, a particular focus around health and life sciences, digitech, etc., and things we've learned through the pandemic with all the smart testing pilot work we've done, etc., we think we'll be able to translate into economic opportunity going forward. So we developed an economic recovery plan. We brought in a good team of consultants to work with us right from the outset, and we focused on innovation, employment, housing, and the visitor economy. We've got some really key capital projects which we've been progressing since then, which we think are catalysts for investment growth in the city and for further things that will happen. Some key projects around the Littlewoods Film Studios, in the Knowledge Quarter, particularly the Hemisphere project, the next major project in Paddington Village, the Pall Mall, the next phase of the Central Business District, and other key schemes such as the King's Dock regeneration, which we're in the procurement process to select a developer for that at the moment. So we didn't let the grass grow under our feet. We think Liverpool's got a very bright future, but it's really, really important that we work really quickly and smartly to come out of this recession as effectively as we can. And I think the final thing I'd say at this point, Alex, is the key thing is about partnerships and collaboration within the city region, and that's public and private sector, but also between cities. And in particular, given our strengths in health and life sciences, we think the axis between Liverpool and Manchester, and I'm sure Jessica might want to touch on this later without putting words into her mouth, is really, really important, particularly around things like infection control, where we have great strengths, and digital and technology aspects of health and life sciences. And the hookup with Bruntwood SciTech creates a great platform for that collaboration between the two cities and with Alderley Park in Cheshire. And the ability to operate on different levels is going to be incredibly important as we come out of this difficult period, but really build positively for the future.
Thank you very much, Tony. That's a fantastic introduction to our conversation. I'd like to start our panel by exploring what you were mentioning at the start about the pandemic. Of course, has been a challenge for cities across the UK, but indeed Liverpool's response to the pandemic has perhaps been somewhat unique, and that really does send a signal about the city region, its potential for the future, and particularly maybe investors wanting to be involved in the agenda that you've just outlined. Jessica, I'd want to come to you first. I mean, from your involvement in the city region at Bruntwood, how would you assess Liverpool's response to the pandemic, and what sort of signal is that sending to you as an investor?
Hi, thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us today on this panel. I mean, I think what Liverpool did, and Tony talked about really quickly recognising, almost at the same moment, he recognised there was a pandemic which had health consequences, the need to think about the economy and economic recovery. And Liverpool came right out of the traps with a plan that and a focus on how do we move through, what's the city going to be like after the pandemic, recognising it needed to flex and change because we didn't quite know what the course of the pandemic was going to look like. And for us as a private sector partner, that was a fantastically exciting thing actually to be involved in, because we needed to be able to see beyond the immediate health consequences and play a part, and a real part, in thinking about what the city was going to look like 1, 2, 5, 10 years ahead. And so for us, that provided a fantastic signal and really gave a sense of Liverpool's approach to partnership and its desire really to work with public sector partners, but also private sector in a new and very dynamic way. It was a very energizing thing to do at a point when the world seemed pretty bleak, and I think has stood Liverpool in very good stead over the recent months.
Fantastic. So clearly very positive outlook there from Jessica. I'd like to bring in Barry at Morgan Sindall, if I may, next. My internet is holding up. Barry, I know you've been working on the Paddington Village project. And I wonder, how has the construction sector held up during the pandemic? And what signal did this send to you, Barry, about the resilience of the city region?
Yeah, well, it's been a tough year for everybody, hasn't it, in many aspects. And of course, construction is one of them industries that was supported by the government and encouraged to kind of continue to help bolster the economy and keep the country moving. So everybody had to work quite quickly and fleet of foot to kind of keep things moving along. I think Tony mentioned earlier, we're working on a number of key projects in the city centre, both for Liverpool and for the universities and other clients. And so it was really important that we came together with everybody to formulate a plan to keep things going. And I must say, the support that we got from the City Council, and we do have a really strong collaborative relationship with them, especially at the Paddington Village Knowledge Quarter site. It really was a dual effort to keep things going. We didn't panic. We kind of set some plans in place that we both agreed that we could implement quite quickly to protect the people, protect the people coming to work on the site and make sure that they were safe and well and that they could work effectively. But it was really refreshing, I suppose, Alex, in terms of our collaboration with the City Council to make sure that we did things in the right way. And they've been incredibly supportive in other things. I think we know, it's been well documented, that they were quite quick out of the traps to implement a testing regime in the city centre, which I thought was quite a brave and kind of forward-thinking things to do, which was better than the response of other cities, I must add, to make sure that people could be tested regularly. And that really helped the construction sector. We got 250 men per site on some of our sites in Liverpool. So making sure that we had regular, constant testing immediately available was just a real benefit. And I think we worked through it really well.
Well, fantastic. So they're really a positive outlook from two private sector actors, and great to see and hear that the construction sector has been able to be resilient due to the proactivity of the City Council in Liverpool. So I think we've got a perfect framing for our discussion now. I want to bring Tony back in, if I may, and maybe you can just go a little bit deeper into the actual economic recovery plan of the city and what you're really going to be focusing on and perhaps why.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Let me start with the why first. The why we're focusing on these things is because we think these are the things that will work for the city. And Barry's touched on this. When we put the economic recovery plan together, right from the outset, we did really extensive engagement with business. That's carried on right the way through the pandemic, with very regular sessions with business leaders in the city and lots of conversations with key people, so that we were hearing what the needs of our economy were, rather than just looking at things through a public sector lens. And I think that's incredibly important. And the economic recovery plan we submitted to government came with really strong endorsements from a whole range of business leaders and representatives in the city and beyond. And it really was a collective effort rather than, as I said, a public sector document. So I touched on this earlier. We looked at 4 areas. We looked at innovation, particularly looking at Liverpool's strengths around health and life sciences, infection control. And actually, during the course of the pandemic, our thinking on this has further evolved, because we believe there is great scope for building pandemic resilience into our thinking going forwards, because I think the world has woken up and realised the impact this pandemic has had, with more than 2 million deaths, with trillions of pounds of lost economic output. And so investing in pandemic resilience is incredibly important. And we don't think there's anywhere in the UK, and very few places in the world, that are better placed than Liverpool to lead in that position. And so part of our, one of the key projects in our economic recovery plan is called the HIL, Health Improvement Liverpool, which is a combination of digital and physical project. But at the heart of this, we will have research and innovation around infection control, and we think pandemic resilience going forwards. And the reason why just to put some meat on the bones very quickly on this, the reason why we think we have these strengths, Liverpool had the world's first school of tropical medicine, which has gone from strength to strength over the period it's been there, over many decades. Obviously, the expertise in the university, led by people like Professor Ian Buchan and Professor Callum Semple, who's part of the SAGE committee, but also, and most people don't make this connection, Liverpool has one of the biggest vet schools in the country, and 70% of pandemics transfer from the animal kingdom to the human, to human beings. And so zoonotics is incredibly important. And our university has world-leading strength in that area, and in fact, the world's biggest health animal database. So we put all of those assets together with everything we've learned through the pandemic, and great collaboration between public and private sector. And for example, we now have major American companies wanting to co-invest with us in this sort of thing going forward, and we're in detailed discussions with them. So really exciting things around our strengths. But on top of these things like retrofit housing, we think is a really big area of generating employment quickly, and good employment with local supply chains, and tackling issues such as carbon emissions because of the nature of the housing stock we have in the city and the city region. The visitor economy is incredibly important to us, and most people may have heard about the initiative we had called Liverpool Without Walls as part of coming out of the first economic lockdown, where we closed streets which have remained closed and brought our restaurants out into the streets so that we could get sufficient covers with social distancing to make the businesses viable. And that has gone from strength to strength, and really the debate now is about how we build on that to turn Liverpool into much more of a sort of a European city with street cafe culture at its heart in terms of the atmosphere for the evening economy, etc. Really exciting stuff that our hospitality sector has responded to really, really well, and a whole host of other things around that. So as I said, Alex, we tried to play to our strengths from the outset, but we put innovation and sustainability at the heart of our plan. Inclusion is incredibly important. We don't want to leave people behind in terms of our economic recovery, and this pandemic has exacerbated inequalities in our poor communities, and we need to work together as cities and regions to tackle that inequality and make sure we're creating opportunities for everybody to participate in the growth to come. And hopefully what comes through from all of the participants in this today is a real burning ambition to work together and get this right, and to be prepared to take some risks. And that's why we stepped in and piloted mass testing, because we're prepared to be bold as a city. And I think that attitude and mindset, the not being frightened to fail, but fail quickly and learn and move on, is going to be really important as we move forward. But all of this is underpinned by the strength of partnership across the whole city region, but particularly between the public and private sectors.
Well, thank you very much, Tony. There's certainly a lot to unpack there, and I can see there are some questions coming in from the audience, so please do keep sending them in. There's a lot to deep dive into, lots of exciting things happening in the Liverpool City region, and thank you for giving us so much colour on that. Raphael, I would like to bring you in here. I mean, we've talked about the amazing collaboration between the public and private sectors and perhaps the opportunities there, but can you maybe go into a little bit more depth about where exactly investors can play a role within the economic recovery plan, and perhaps some other projects in the broader city region that have the most potential?
Oh, sure, and thank you very much for bringing me in, Alex. I mean, just put things in some numbers to start with. We have an economic recovery plan that potentially has projects with a value of around £8 billion. The public sector contribution to those projects is going to be a small fraction of that. So investment from the private sector is absolutely fundamental to delivering our economic recovery plan. If I just, I suppose, a shout out for my fellow panel members and their organisations. We're obviously working with the city and with Bruntwood on the Paddington development, working with some of Barry's colleagues through the Muse Developments part of Morgan Sindall, in terms of outside the city, but in terms of the regeneration of St Helens and St Helens Town Centre as well. But it goes broader than purely property as well. We're very much focusing on innovation assets for the future across the city region. So we're currently working in partnership with Unilever and the National Packaging Innovation Centre to create a national packaging research centre on the Wirral. Tony picked up on retrofit housing. We're working with the Manufacturing Technology Centre to understand how we can bring modern methods of construction into housing retrofit, and in order to make it a attractive place for investment, is by way of example, we currently have a partnership with the private sector to deliver fibre digital network across the city region that links Science Technology Centre at Hartree in Daresbury and Holton on the edge of the city region through the entire city region and to the North Atlantic fibre optic cable. could go on, but
no, thank you very much. It's very useful to hear some of the other projects outside of just the real estate sector. Certainly a lot of opportunities across the city region. I suppose to look at some of the questions we've got and some of the discussions, some very interesting stuff going on from the audience. There has been one mention of Liverpool and Manchester as both being maritime cities, and the maritime sector is worth £4 billion, the economy. I suppose I'm going to sort of reframe that slightly and look more into what sort of collaborative efforts can be stimulated across the north of England between Liverpool and neighbouring cities, and what that might mean for the economic recovery plan. So Jessica, I'm going to bring you back in here. I know Bruntwood operates and has interests across several cities. How do you think Liverpool can work with other cities outside of London in its recovery plans, and what sort of catalysts are needed for this kind of development?
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, Bruntwood, we do have major portfolio in Manchester, also in Leeds, Liverpool and Birmingham. And we're also part of, one of the founder members of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, which was really recognising the importance of cities being able to work together. And this isn't a sort of, in a way that is value creating, and really what sits at the heart of that is cities understanding their absolute strengths, not sort of in some broad brush, we're good at everything, but absolutely what is it that are our strengths, and what are the things that we need to guard against and we need to be able to develop. So Tony talked about innovation, and particularly around health and life sciences, but then particularly around infection and disease control, and then around resilience. So really kind of getting to the heart of what is Liverpool's absolute specialism and focus and thing that it can add globally. And if you start building that up across the cities, you see that you have a much stronger economy and a much stronger collective effort. And this sort of actually rather old-fashioned argument about competition between cities, and of course there always will be some competition between cities, starts dissipating, because what you see is that the collective efforts are really important. And I think Tony talked in his introduction around Liverpool, Manchester and Alderley Park. Alderley Park Life Sciences Centre really been playing an important role around medicines discovery, and the relationship between those specialisms and Liverpool's and Manchester's start giving you something that is very globally attractive. And I think I would like to say one other thing about, and it came up in the questions, I think, which is this all about inward investment? And I think the answer is no, it's not all about inward investment. Investment is really important coming from the private sector, unlocking that within the UK. Inward investment, really important too. But actually what you can use the private sector for is to drive an ecosystem which is really sticky, really attractive, really vibrant, which will help those local businesses be able to grow. And if you pull into that skills development and the right kind of skills within your local economy, you've got something that's really cooking on gas. And I think there's something that we need to see as a very holistic, rounded piece, not just you bung in a load of money and suddenly everything works. You need the right fertile ground for that. And I think that's one of the things that Liverpool's been really looking at within the Knowledge Quarter, and it's partly why we invested at the beginning of the pandemic as Bruntwood SciTech in SciOnTech, because we could see the absolute opportunity there with all of the aspects that you needed, world-class specialisms, a sort of rich ecosystem that was ripe for growth, and that partnership from the public sector, which was going to really support growth there.
Certainly, and I think that's a very pertinent point. It's not just about inward investment, it's about developing the ecosystem. I mean, certainly at FDI Intelligence, we're doing deep dives into the collaboration between some of the innovation that's happening and how that can also not only maybe magnetize inward investment in the immediate sense, but longer term, it's actually building up a proposition for a region. And more broadly, I mean, on a global scale, you know, last year you had foreign direct investment fall by 42%. The outlook is looking fairly weak this year. So in that sense, it's not completely focusing on inward investment, which is particularly competitive landscape at the moment, might be a better approach. So I wonder, Barry, would you agree with Jessica in that sense? Is it not just about inward investment? Do you think that is the right approach to collaborate across city regions to really find a stronger proposition?
Yeah, and I've seen that in practice, Alex, as well. You know, I've been with Tony on a number of events where he's speaking collaboratively with the people from Manchester, actually, and the link between the two universities. And, you know, for the people on the call who geographically maybe don't understand that, okay, there's a difference in the accent, but Liverpool and Manchester are incredibly close. You know, the infrastructure and transport links between the two cities are really, it's half an hour in the car kind of thing. The M62 has just been redeveloped into a smart motorway. The train links are pretty decent, and there's massive similarities between the two cities in terms of the way they're regenerating themselves and reinventing themselves. You know, that post-industrial kind of era that we had, and I run the Northwest as part of our business, and I just see massive similarities in terms of the collaboration between investors and developers and both city councils in terms of placemaking and regeneration, and making sure that we do things in the right way, in the right steps. I mean, there's loads of examples, and you could look at what's happening in Salford at the moment around the New Bailey area, what's previously happened in Media City, and how that's just continuing to grow. And then, if you're looking at Liverpool, at the other end of the M62, that knowledge quarter, science tech, life sciences, all that stuff. You can just feel it growing. It's just the momentum is there. And then the outlying districts as well, you know, Wirral Growth Company and the great stuff that they're doing over on the Wirral as well, which is, you know, Liverpool's partner as well. So I see it happening in practice, and there's massive similarities between the two cities. And I know that Tony, as a leader, he embraces it and he encourages it. And yeah, it seems like it's gaining more traction by the day almost.
Certainly, and that also sort of chimes with leveraging the cultural sector that Liverpool has. You know, Tony mentioned earlier the pop-up studio coming in the Littlewoods building, and you see the regenerative potential of the film and UK film and TV industry, which of course has boomed over recent years. But I'd like to bring in an audience question, which actually very much aligns with my next planned question, and it's posed to Tony, and it's Phil. So thank you very much for the question, Phil. Phil says, Tony mentioned the Pall Mall development. Is he confident that this will go ahead soon, given the impact that the pandemic has had on office working? So that's the direct question, but also I suppose a broader question is about what is the future of cities and office work and the centre of Liverpool City. So Tony, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've got lots of thoughts on that, but I'll try to condense them into a couple of things. In terms of the Pall Mall development, it's a great location. The central business district is really, really important part of the city, and the supply of grade A office space has been pretty limited in Liverpool of available new office space because of the growing demand. So we're very confident it will go forward. We had the first phase, we had lettings lined up for the first phase, working with CTP and Kier, the developers there last time. That interest is on pause. It hasn't gone away. I can't go into too much detail. We're very confident that will come back. And yes, we think that will go ahead. And look, there's an awful lot has been said during the pandemic that the role of cities is finished. Everybody's going to work from home now. Anybody that thinks 200 years of urbanization is going to change because of a pandemic is nuts, quite frankly. But what it will do, and it is doing, is accelerating the trends that were already there, in my view. So the trends towards more agile working. But what we see are two things. One, wholly home working creates all sorts of, it might create some cost advantages, but all sorts of challenges in terms of how you build teamwork, how you build cultures, how you build creativity and innovation in your workplace, and generate ideas that allow businesses to be distinctive in the fields that they're in. And you can only go so far with home working. Lots of businesses we talk to, and I said before, we talk and listen to a lot of businesses are telling us that that balance between agile working and office accommodation is where they need to be in the future. And to do that, we believe that a lot of companies will require new, more modern workspaces to operate in. And so there will be demand for new office accommodation in the city. We think that's starting to come through now. The work that we're doing in the Knowledge Quarter with Scientech and other partners, we think will help to deliver that supply going forwards. But what it will also mean is that parts of our city centre, and this will apply to other places as well, will ultimately need to be repurposed. And the trends in retailing will do the same as well. And I'm really comfortable at that. I've been challenged recently to say, where are your plans for repurposing the city centre? Well, you know, we're concentrating on our big catalyst projects, and the really important thing is to prioritise at this stage, make sure we're stimulating growth with our partners and stimulating investment confidence in the right places, and be confident that, you know, over the next couple of years, as things shake down, we'll be able to see those trends emerging and then get our strategies right for repurposing the city centre. And I always think of cities as living, breathing organisms that are changing all the time. They change with each wave of migration, with each turn of the economic cycle, with each generation. Now, obviously, technology drives change really quickly as well. And it's about that agility in your thinking and strategy. And you can't fix it. If you get your city absolutely perfect, by tomorrow, something's out of date. So it's constantly evolving, and it's getting comfortable with that, you know, being in a constant state of transition without losing focus on your priorities. And that's certainly the approach that we're adopting in Liverpool, but doing that hopefully in a smart way. So final thing to say is the idea that the role of cities is finished, absolutely no way. And I believe there will be a strong demand for high quality workspaces in the city centre, and that will be part of the renewal of the whole city going forwards.
Certainly, and I couldn't agree more. The potential downsides of working from home is my internet's a little bit shoddy today, but not to mention the mental health benefits of being in the office, the collaboration that you get from there, and also more broadly, you know, leveraging the amazing atmosphere that Liverpool has as a city. And I suppose, Raphael, I'd like to bring you in here. I mean, would you add anything to what Tony's just discussed? And perhaps a more specific question, what do you envision for the city and how it may be repurposed, and how that repurposing may align with the cultural strengths that are pre-existent in Liverpool?
I mean, I think everybody knows that, you know, Liverpool's, you know, cultural strengths, you know, and culture in its absolutely in its broadest sense, whether that's sport, whether it's music, whether it's entertainment, etc. You know, it has an absolute top-notch reputation in that area. And I think we need to think about why people want to live in cities, and, you know, and why businesses would want to locate themselves in cities. And they're not necessarily quite the same thing. There'll be plenty of people who live in Liverpool currently and work in Manchester, to bring a point of competition. Equally, I've got colleagues working in Liverpool who live in Manchester. My wife works for a London company, but is based in Liverpool. So, what's going to attract people to Liverpool? It's about having that cultural offer. It's about having the right housing offer that's going to attract people. I mean, it's got huge advantages in terms of affordability over the southeast of England. And clearly, yeah, we're all speculating to an extent how the pandemic will change practices. I agree with what Tony's saying, but it will, I think, inevitably give people more flexibility. Certainly in certain industries of where they choose to live and where they choose to work as well, and we need to be able to react to that, and having that cultural housing broader offer is absolutely key to that.
Definitely. I wonder if also on the repurposing point, of course, lines very well with what you've just said in terms of the cultural sector, but Barry, I know we discussed previously about the repurposing and retrofitting that's ongoing in the city, and what sort of potential do you see in that space, and what's your take on how the city may progress moving forward?
Well, that could be answered in a load of different aspects, but certainly in the office environment, the guys have already talked about well-being and mental health and that repurposing of offices. Part of our group are the Overbury group. I think you may know Overbury, and they're seeing quite a high demand in London for kind of change, you know, in the office environment. And I absolutely agree with what Raphael and Tony have said. people will not want to just solely work from home. They will want to get into the office for all the benefits that I'll see. But only time will tell, I guess. You know, we've got a bit of a journey to go on that, haven't we? And as Tony said, it will be an evolution. But you can only predict that people will want to get back into the office, and then that will create some change and repurposing and redevelopment opportunities moving forwards.
Certainly.
Can I come in?
Yeah, please. I was going to bring you
in on that part, because so Bruntwood SciTech have obviously invested in Liverpool, but Bruntwood has been in Liverpool for very many years, 15, 20 years, providing an office space within the CBD. And I think what's interesting is that last summer, that narrative around the office being dead was very strong, and that it was, you know, that was a very easy headline to be writing. But actually, as we started reopening offices, what you did see is people coming back and liking being back in the office and starting to see those benefits again. And we've talked about, you know, you've talked between you about quite a lot of those benefits, but I think there's one that we've missed, which is around the equity benefits and social equity, because actually it's fine for me to sit in my nice house with a study that I can work in and decent broadband, but actually if you're in a overcrowded space, if you're looking after, if you've got children, if you're in all kinds of different environments, you're going to really find that a much more challenging thing to do. And so I think we need to remember the equity questions and the fact that the office is a great leveler, and it's also somewhere where you learn things. It's not a punishment to go to an office. Actually, that sort of ability to develop your own skills and to grow in your career, I think is really important, and something that many of us will have experienced over very many years. And to Tony's point, we're continuing to invest in the city centre. So we have a large office building, the Plaza in Liverpool, and we're investing in reinventing that building, creating co-working space, lounge space, cafe space, well-being spaces and studios, and the sort of environments that people want to come into. And I think I'd just leave with one final thought on this, which is the last holiday I went on before the pandemic meant that we don't go abroad anymore, was to Italy, and I went to Pompeii, and I saw a city that had obviously been devastated 2,000 years ago, but actually a city that was recognisable. And some of those fundamentals about human interaction and society and people wanting to eat together and socialise together and go to a leisure centre and sit in a forum and go to a market, they are things that have tracked back through human history, and Pompeii wasn't rebuilt, but other cities were, and they develop over time. But some of those core fundamentals about people wanting to come together always remain. And I think what's brilliant about Liverpool, recognising that with City Without Walls at the very beginning of the pandemic, was how do we allow people to come together even if they can't in exactly the same way they did before. And I think that that's just worth us all remembering as we look forward into the future.
Certainly, I think that's a vital point. And given this panel is focused on the levelling up agenda, I mean, fundamentally, that is about ensuring a better quality of life for people all across the UK and in the Liverpool City region. And that may be through economic means, but it is actually the social aspects, and very much chimes with the cultural benefits of going into the office, bustling out, coming out of the office, and there's cultural events going on. That certainly is a huge draw to the city. I see a question from Danielle Gillespie, so thank you very much for sending a question. I suppose this probably might be best posed to Raphael, who was mentioning about the housing offer in the city previously. Danielle says, with £7.4 billion for affordable housing available now and signalling for major infrastructure funding coming at the next Vista event, what and where are the big housing opportunities for city and city regions in the short and longer term? So Raphael, I'll pose this to you first, and maybe Tony or others, but yeah, Tony can touch base on that afterwards.
I think Danielle is one of our partners in terms of our housing development offer. If I've got the right Danielle here, and I hope I have. You know, we're clearly working very closely with partners in terms of broader housing development across the city region. Huge opportunities on either side of the Mersey. Tony obviously talked very much about the sort of Liverpool waters potential, and on the other side, in terms of rural waters, development of housing, and then broader across the city region. I mean, we see huge potential to improve our housing offer across the region in terms of aspirational housing. We also have a shortage of smaller one-bedroom accommodation across the city region as well. So we're absolutely sort of working with public and private sector colleagues in terms of making housing sites attractive for investment and capable of investment to deliver on those objectives.
Thank you, Raphael. Sorry, Tony, I know you want to come in here, so please go ahead.
Look, the housing agenda is a huge part of what we do, and now just weaving into the last question, and particularly some of the points that Jess made. It's really important that we look holistically at the things that generate well-being, and we have a city plan that's developed by all of our partners in the city, and things like education, health, and well-being are absolutely key. And actually, the link between good health and economic productivity are absolutely fundamental. And you only have to look at the data in Liverpool to realise that we won't build a successful economy without improving health outcomes, without improving education outcomes. So we're focused on all of those things, and we do that in a very joined up way in the city, and I think quite a unique way in the outcome focus. At the heart of this is about empowering people to take control of their own lives. So fundamentally different relationship between the state and individuals, which I think is has real potential for the future, and the housing agenda is absolutely central to that. Obviously, we've got some really big strategic sites. Raf just mentioned Liverpool Waters, that P lead on, but work with a range of other developers on a huge tract of land from the city centre running north. And at the far end of that, of course, is going to be bookended by the new Everton Stadium, which is coming in, well, it's in for planning at the moment. The planning committee will be meeting in just over a month's time to determine that application. But we have Stonebridge Cross out towards the motorways, a really significant site there that is capable of building a whole new community. The south end of the city centre, Festival Garden site that we've just let the remediation contract on, which again is a really big strategic site and waterfront site, a complex site, but with support from Danielle and her colleagues, we're able to, and the city region, we're now able to take that forward. But it's also about retrofit housing we talked about before, improving the thermal capacity of those properties and the quality of those properties that will generate real benefits for the people that live there, but also reduce carbon emissions and generate lots of jobs. And of course, a really big issue, and Danielle and I talk about this regularly, is about renewal. We talked about renewal of the city centre, but renewal of our neighbourhoods. This is something which we haven't focused on sufficiently as a country in the last decade or so. And a lot of our housing stock is going to be obsolete in future decades if we don't start to get a proper renewal programme. Raf touched on building aspirational housing. I want us to build aspirational housing in some of our more traditional communities as well, so that people don't, as they get on and do well with all the economic opportunity being created, they don't up and leave those communities, but they have choices to stay in those communities, to build strength, to create role models, and that sort of vibrancy in those places, rather than polarizing different parts of our cities. So the role that housing plays is absolutely central. And as a housing person throughout my career, I would say that, but it is really important. And the whole thing is about, for me, it's about placemaking. Barry touched on this earlier on, and it's understanding all of those component parts, but at the center of this are the people themselves, and empowering people to take control, economically empowering them, but empowering them to manage their own health, their well-being, and building that resilience in communities which we need to succeed. And that's at the center of what we're about in Liverpool.
Certainly, and thank you very much for going to such depth. In that sense, lots of opportunities in the housing sector. We've got another great question, and please keep sending them in. I want to engage with the audience as much as possible, and this really chimes with the whole focus of this panel of the Levelling Up agenda. I'm going to come to Barry first, and others feel free to chime in afterwards. It says, what does the panel think the government's intentions are with the levelling up agenda, specifically in the context of Liverpool and the northwest of England? So any thoughts on that, Barry?
Well, I'm not a member of the government, so I'm not sure I'm absolutely qualified to answer that, but I'll tell you what my opinion is on it. I mean, obviously, there's been inequality geographically and economically in our country for hundreds of years, hasn't it? And that inequality still exists. I think the government can do lots of things. They can help us with investment. They can help us with funding. And there's lots of that stuff going on at the moment. And we're busy kind of applying for what we can get our hands on. But I think that we've got to kind of plough our own furrow as well a bit, haven't we? You know, the leadership within the city councils, and certainly, you know, Tony's job is to make sure that the growth and regeneration in our city, that we're looking after ourselves as well, and making sure that we're strong in the recovery plans. And before COVID, actually, Liverpool was showing some really great, strong growth. It's been halted a bit during this year. It's declined a bit, but it is coming back. If you look at all the indices, it is growing back. And of course, you know, but you do need investment, but it's not just government stuff. So I'm kind of putting your question back to you a little bit. The government do play a huge role. They've got to provide the right platform, investment, encouragement, and all the rest of it. But we've got to be able to kind of look at ourselves as well and kind of make sure that we're doing the right things and putting things in place to enable that growth, which actually there's lots of really good things happening at the moment in Liverpool. You know, lots of the sectors are still really, really buoyant. Life sciences, you know, the port status that I think nobody's mentioned yet. You know, the port in Liverpool, which is part of our heritage, is showing really, really strong numbers at the moment in terms of its productivity and what it's bringing in. It's got really good retail resilience. Tony's mentioned earlier about the footfall, and in comparison to other cities, it really has shown a strength there. I don't know if that answers your question. I'm not part of the government. I could give you a big list of things we'd really like, but
no, it's fantastic. I think you've just sort of reiterated the point we've been making throughout the panel, is that the leadership in city regions, embodied by what Tony's been discussing, is actually where regions can benefit from the levelling up agenda. It's not necessarily the government's intention per se. It's actually what the regions are doing in themselves. I wonder, does anyone else have anything else to chime in with on the levelling up agenda? And Tony, please go ahead.
I'll come in after Jess because I can see she wants to come in as well.
Sorry, Jess, go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you, Tony. That was really kind. I mean, my thought is that actually devolution is something that we should continue to look for, because actually, and having worked in central government for very many years of my career, I can see how hard it is to make decisions from central government about individual investments. Actually give that decision making to local places, build on the devolutionary structures that we've already got around our cities, and you'll get much more bang for your government buck. Now, I think that even if they don't take more devolutionary steps in the short term, there is lots, as Barry was saying, that city regions can do to be really strategic in bringing forward propositions that are going to really drive their economies in a way that is collaborative within the city regions. And again, that will drive greater value. Tony, I won't say any more because I'm sure you were going to cover some of those points and more.
Just really simply here, there needs to be more clarity from government around their economic strategy, and I'm sure the budget next month presents a real opportunity for the Chancellor and the Prime Minister to set out that. I think everybody's looking for that. There's a little bit of conflation between social agendas and economic agendas in terms of spending. But I always think, as a place, I spent a lot of my early years regenerating coalfield communities after the pits closed, and you have to come up with a purpose for those places, and you have to make an offer to the outside world, not just say everything's terrible around here, give us some money please. That is not a compelling proposition to a government with scarce resources. So that, you know, that join up on a collective narrative between the public and private sectors, I think, is really important. A compelling vision that plays to your strengths, that positions your place alongside other places, but makes a really clear offer to government about what we can deliver, not just for the city and its people, but for UK PLC as well, is where we need to position ourselves. And that's why we came out of the block so quickly with our economic recovery plan. And the government's levelling up fund isn't to the extent of the government's investment in economic growth as far as I'm concerned. I think there will be more to come. And what we need to do, we need to be not waiting for permission to act, but getting on with the things that we can do. As Barry said, we need to be bold. We need to build those partnerships, use our covenant strength as public sector institutions wisely, but be prepared to have some skin in the game and take some risk as well. But focus on the catalyst and make that compelling offer to government that this is a city and a city region that is worth investment in, because the returns on that investment are really, really sound. And if we can do that, working with other northern cities, because it's not just about Liverpool and the Midlands as well, then we can really start to rebalance things in the UK over the long term. And it's, some of it comes from central government. Of course, they've got a really important role to play, but so have the cities themselves. And by the cities, I don't mean the councils or the public sector. I mean all of the economic capacity working together in a joined up way at that local level. And I think we're well placed to do that. But we will continue to bang the drum, of course. But it's about delivery and building credibility, so that when somebody scratches the surface from all of your shiny plans, they can see real substance beneath that. And I think that's not just compelling for government, but that's compelling for investors as well.
Sure. Very quickly, I'm going to move on to a final point as we come towards the end of our panel discussion, but there's clearly a few questions that from audience members. They're keen to know whether Liverpool is in the mix for planned relocations from London and between now and 2030. Tony, can you give us any idea of that in terms of civil service relocation?
Yeah, look, the whole picture is still a bit unclear at the moment. There are few government departments that don't know about what's on offer in Liverpool. We talked to lots of senior civil servants. We're putting the economic recovery plans together. We continue that dialogue, and we're working really hard to position Liverpool for any opportunities that come up, and any future relocations. We think Liverpool has some great opportunities to offer, and we'll be making sure we're very much in the shop window for those.
Fantastic. Now, the last point,
Alex,
please go ahead, Barry, please.
Yeah, can I just add? I mean, there's already some really good news on that front, isn't there? The Royal College of Physicians are due to move to Liverpool next year. It's the oldest Royal College. It's been in London since Henry VIII's days. And it's finally seen the light and is moving to Liverpool next year. So, people are seeing that Liverpool is a great offer with the right culture and the right people and the right skills available to move their businesses to Liverpool. It's already happening in some levels.
Certainly. Now, the last question I'm going to take from the audience, and then we probably will have to wrap things up, is the role of the arts and cultural sector in supporting the COVID recovery. I'm not sure who wants to chime in first on this, but maybe Raphael, I know you've touched a little bit on the cultural sector. What do you want to see from the arts and cultural sector in supporting the recovery?
It's going to be two ways, isn't it? It's what arts and culture can do to support recovery, but also what we can do to support the recovery of arts and culture as well, which clearly been a sector that's suffered significantly as a result of the pandemic. We are already, beating that drum very much for that sector in terms of funding we've had available for film, funding we've had available for the music sector. But as I said before, having a great, vibrant cultural offer is absolutely key to economic recovery. It will keep, the skills that we have from, the great universities in Liverpool. We already have, high levels of retention of graduates, and that's absolutely part of what keeps those graduates in Liverpool, and will attract, economic development because of that broad offer that the city and the city region has.
So, yeah, please go ahead, Tony.
Yeah, look, just supporting what Raph said. In its own right, the cultural sector is hugely important for us. Brings in 35 million visitors a year in normal years, and we want to get back to that really quickly. The Culture differentiates our knowledge quarter because of the location of key things like the Everyman Theatre, the Philharmonic. All the animation takes place on Hope Street, right in the heart of our cultural quarter. And the Paddington Village, which Barry's heavily involved in, we're creating an event space right in the middle of Paddington Village, so we bring culture there. But I think the other thing that people need to look out for is, as we come out of lockdown, when we really can go for it, you wait and see what Liverpool does. And we've got some great plans, and we'll do things on a scale. Obviously, we were European capital of culture. We know how to put on big events. And Liverpool isn't going to come out of this quietly. It's going to come out loud and proud, and culture is going to be absolutely at the heart of that. So when it's safe to do so, get yourselves to Liverpool, trust me.
Fantastic, thank you very much. I want to quickly go around to Barry and Jessica, just any closing thoughts for the panel. There's clearly a positive note from Tony there. Why should people be looking to Liverpool in the levelling up agenda? We have only a few minutes left, so just very short thoughts if you can.
Okay, I'll go first. I think the big thing that the city offers is the people, because it encompasses all the things that we've spoken about: the skills, the culture, and the future. I suppose, you know, we're trying hard to keep the graduates in the city, and also Tony's got a really big drive in looking after the people in the outlying districts as well, and making sure that job opportunities and well-being and health is really supportive in them areas.
Fantastic. And Jessica?
I'm going to finish on the partnership point, which is I think the way that Liverpool's embraced private sector and public sector working together to really generate more value is fantastic, and a very nimble and flexible way of working, and that I think stands Liverpool in great stead as we look ahead.
Fantastic. So certainly watch this space. Liverpool is a place to be looking at as you purvey some investment opportunities. Thank you so much, panelists, for going to such depth. We could have covered so much more, but we've come to the end of our time now. And thank you all audience members for sending in your questions and being so engaged with our discussion. It's very much appreciated. This is unfortunately the end of our allotted time, but please note that there are further webinars throughout this week as part of the London Real Estate Forum Investment Summit. And these can be coming from local city mayors and leaders about their plans and strategies for driving growth across the UK. This afternoon, you can hear about the challenges and opportunities facing the West Midlands and Birmingham in 2 separate events. Recordings of this event, as well as this webinar, as well as all summit sessions and details will be on the lref.co.uk website. There will also be an event poll popping up shortly, so please take a moment to share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. At this stage, I think we've run out of time, so thank you all for listening. Take care and stay safe.